सो हेलो गाइस, कैसे हैं आप सब लोग। आई होप सब बढ़िया होंगे। माई सेल्फ सिद्धिकांत सिकवाल और मैं आप सभी का स्वागत करता हूँ हमारा अपना प्यारा सा चैनल एसक्यूएल में इन दी सीरीज ऑफ एनसीईआरटी लीडिंग लाइन बाय लाइन। और आज हम करने वाले हैं न्यूरल कंट्रोल एंड कोऑर्डिनेशन। तो चलिएगा शुरू करते हैं बिना वक्त गवाए। एज यू नो, द फंक्शन ऑफ द organ system in our body must be coordinated to maintain homeostasis. Coordination is the process through which two or more organs interlate and complement the functions of one another. For example, when we do a physical exercise, the energy demand is increased for maintaining and increased muscular activity. The supply of oxygen is also increased. The increased supply of oxygen necessitates an increase in the rate of respiration. Heart beats and increase the blood flow via blood vessels. When physical exercise is stopped, the activities of nerves, lungs, heart, and kidney gradually returns to their normal condition. Thus, the functions of muscles, lungs, heart, blood vessels, kidney, and other organs are coordinated while performing a physical exercise. In our body, the neural system is the neural system and endocrine system jointly coordinated and integrate all the activities of the organs so that they function in the synchronized fashion. The neural system provides an organized network of point-to-point connections for quick coordination. The endocrine system provides a chemical integration through hormones. In this chapter, you will learn about the neural system of human, mechanism of a neural coordination like transmission of nerve impulse and impulse conduction across a synapse. 18.1 Neural System. The neural system of all animals is composed of a highly specialized cells called neurons, which can detect, receive, and transmit different kinds of stimuli. The neural organization is very simple in lower invertebrates. For example, in Hydra is composed of a network of neurons. The neural system is better organized in insects, where a brain is present along with the number of ganglia and a neural tissue. The vertebrates have a more developed neural system. 18.2 Human Neural System. The human neural system is divided into two parts. That is, first is central neural system, that is CNS, and second is the peripheral neural system, that is PNS. The CNS includes the brain and the spinal cord and is the site of information processing and control. The PNS comprises of all nerves of the body associated with CNS, that is brain and spinal cord. The nerve fibers of a PNS are two types, that is if afferent fibers, second is efferent fiber. The afferent nerve fibers transmit impulses from tissue or organ to the CNS, and efferent fibers transmit regulatory impulse from the CNS to the concerned peripheral tissue to organ. The PNS is divided into two divisions called a somatic neural system and autonomic neural system. The somatic neural system is release impulses from the CNS to skeletal muscle, while the autonomic neural system transmits impulses from the CNS to the involuntary organs and smooth muscles of the body. The autonomic neural system is further classified into sympathetic neural system and parasympathetic neural system. Visual neural system is the part of a peripheral neural system and that comprises the whole complex of nerves, fibers, ganglia, and plexus by which impulses travel from the central nervous system to the viscera and from viscera to the central nervous system. 18.3, that is neuron as a structural and functional unit of neural system. A neuron is a microscopic structure composed of three major parts, namely cell body, dendrites, and axon. The cell body contains cytoplasm with a typical cell organelle and certain granular bodies called Nisser's granules. Salt fibers which branch repeatedly and projected out of the cell body also contains Nisser's granules and are called dendrites. These fibers transmit impulses towards the cell body. The axon is a long fiber and a distal end of which is branched. Each branch terminates as a bulb-like knob structure called synaptic knob, which possesses a synaptic vesicles containing a chemicals called neurotransmitters. The axon transmits nerve impulse away from the cell body to a synapse or to a neuromuscular junction. Based on the number of axons and dendrites, the neurons are divided into three types. That is multipolar, with one axon and two or more dendrites, found in cerebral cortex. Second is bipolar, that is with one axon and one dendrite, that is found in the retina of eye. And third is unipolar, that is cell body with one axon only, and it is found usually in embryonic stage. There are two types of axon, namely myelinated or non-myelinated. The myelinated nerve fibers are enveloped with a Schwann cells, which form a myelin sheath around the axon. The gaps between two adjacent myelin sheaths are called nodes of Lanvier. Myelinated nerve fibers are found in a spinal and cranial nerves. Unmyelinated nerve fibers is enclosed by a Schwann cells that does not form a myelin sheath around the axon and is commonly found in the autonomous and somatic nervous system. 18.3.1, Generation and conduction of nerve impulse. The neurons are excitable cells because their members mm, sorry neurons are excitable cells because their membranes are in a polarized state. Do you know why the membranes of neuron is polarized? Different type of ion channels are present on the neural membrane. These ion channels are selectively permeable to different ions. When neuron is not conducting any impulse, that is resting, the axonal membrane is comparatively more permeable to potassium ion, that is K+, and nearly impermeable to sodium ion, that is Na+. Similarly, the membrane is impermeable to negatively charged protein present in the exoplasm. Consequently, the exoplasm inside the axon contains a high concentration of K plus and negatively charged protein and low concentration of Na plus. In contrast, the fluid outside the axon contains a low concentration of K plus, a high concentration of Na plus, and thus form a concentration gradient. These ionic gradients across the resting membranes are maintained by active transport of ions by a sodium-potassium pump, which transports 3Na plus outward for 2K plus into the cell. As a result, the outer surface of the axonal membrane possesses a positive charge, while the inner surface of the membrane becomes a negatively charged and therefore is polarized. The electrical potential difference across the resting plasma membrane is called as a resting potential. You might be curious to know about the mechanism of generation of nerve impulse and its conduction along an axon. When a stimulus is applied at a site, point A, On the polarized membrane, the membrane at the site A becomes a freely permeable to Na+. This leads to a rapid influx of Na+ followed by a reversal of the polarity at that site. That is, the outer surface of the membrane becomes a negatively charged and the inner side becomes a positively charged. The polarity of a membrane at the site A is thus reversed and hence depolarized. Uh, the electrical potential difference across the plasma membrane at a site A is called action potential, which is in fact termed as a nerve impulse. At a site immediately ahead, an axon, example site B, membrane has a positive charge on the outer surface and a negative charge on its inner surface. As a result, current flow on the inner surface from site A to site B. On the outer surface, current flows from site B to site A. To complete the circuit of a current flow, hence the polarity at the site is reversed and action potential is generated at site B. Thus, the impulse, that is action potential generated at site A, arrives at site B. The sequence is repeated along the length of the axon and consequently the impulse is conducted. The rise in the stimulus induced permeability to Na plus is extremely short-lived. It is quickly followed by the rise in permeability to K plus within a fraction a second. K plus diffuses outside the membrane and restores the resting potential of the membrane at the site of excitation and the fiber becomes once more responsive to further stimulation. 18.3.2 Transmission of impulses. A nerve impulse is transmitted from one neuron to another through junction called synapses. A synapsis is formed by a membrane of a presynaptic neuron and a postsynaptic neuron, which may or may not be which may or may not be separated by a gap called synaptic cleft. There are two types of synapses, namely electrical synapses and chemical synapses. At electrical synapses, the membrane of a pre- and postsynaptic neuron are in very closely proximity. Electrical current can flow directly from one neuron into other across these synapses. Transmission of an impulse across electrical synapses is very similar to impulse conduction along the single axon. Impulse transmission across an electrical synapse is always faster than the across a chemical synapse. Electrical synapses are rare in our system. Okay. At a chemical synapse, a membrane of a pre- and a postsynaptic neurons are separated by a fluid-filled space called synaptic cleft. Do you know how the presynaptic neurons transmits an impulse, that is action potential, across a synaptic cleft to the postsynaptic neurons? Chemicals called neurotransmitters are involved in the transmission of impulses at the synapses. The axon terminus contains a vesicles filled these neurotransmitters when the impulse, that is action potential, arrives at the axon terminal. It stimulates the movement of the synaptic vesicles towards the membrane where they fuse with the plasma membrane and release their neurotransmitters in the synaptic cleft. The released neurotransmitters bind to their specific receptors. Present on the postsynaptic membrane, this binding opens ion channels allowing the entry of ions which can generate a new potential in a postsynaptic neuron. A new potential developed may be either excitedly or inhibitedly. 18.4 Central Nervous System. The brain is a central information processing organ of our body and acts as the command and the control system. It controls the voluntary movement, balance of the body, functioning of a vital involuntary organs, example lungs, heart, kidney, etc., thermoregulation, hunger and thirst, cardiac rhythm, 24 hours of our body, activities of several endocrine glands, and the human behavior. It also the site of a processing of a vision, hearing, speech, memory, intelligence, emotions, and thoughts. The human brain is well protected by the skull. Inside the skull, the brain is covered by a cranial meninges constituting an outer layer called dura mater, a very thin middle layer called alkanoid, and inner layer which is contact with the brain tissue called pia mater. The brain can be divided into three major parts, that is first forebrain, second midbrain, and third is hindbrain. 18.4.1 Forebrain. The forebrain consists of a cerebellum, thalamus, and hypothalamus. Cerebellum forms the major part of the human brain. A deep cleft divides the cerebellum longitudinally into two halves, which is termed as a left and right cerebral hemispheres. The hemispheres are connected by a tract of nerve fibers called corpus callosum. The layer of cells which covers the cerebral hemisphere called cerebral cortex and is thrown into the prominent folds. The cerebral cortex is referred to as the gray matter due to its grayish appearance. A neuron cell bodies are concentrated here, giving the color. The cerebral cortex contains a motor areas, sensory areas, and large regions that are neither clearly sensory nor motor in function. These regions are called association areas are responsible for complex functions like intersensory associations, memory, and communications. Fibers of the tracts are covered with the myelin sheath, which constitute the inner part of the cerebral hemisphere. They give an oblique white appearance to the layer and hence is called as white matter. The cerebellum laps around the structure called thalamus, which is a major coordinating center of a sensory and the motor signaling. Another very important part of the brain is hypothalamus, lies at the base of a thalamus. The hypothalamus contains a number of centers which controls a body temperature, urge of eating and drinking. It also contains several groups of neurosecretory cells which secrete hormones called hypothalamic hormones. The inner part of a cerebral hemisphere and a group associated with the deep structures are amygdala, hippocampus, etc., form the complex structure called the limbic lobe or a limbic system. Along with the hypothalamus, it is involved in the regulation of a sexual behavior, expression, and emotional reactions. Example: excitement, pleasure, leg, and fear, and motivation. 18.4.2 that is a midbrain. The midbrain is located between the thalamus and hypothalamus of the forebrain and pons of the hindbrain. A canal called the cerebral aqueduct passes through the midbrain. The dorsal portion of the midbrain consists mainly four round swelling lobes that is called corpora quadrigemina. That is 18.4.3. hindbrain. The hindbrain comprises pons, cerebellum, and medulla, also called a medulla oblongata. Pons consists of a fibrous tracts that interconnect the different regions of the brain. Cerebellum has a very convoluted surface in the order of provided provide the additional space for many more neurons. The medulla of the brain is connected to the spinal cord. The medulla contains centers which control respiration, cardiovascular reflexes, and gastric secretions. Three major regions make up the brain stem: midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata, which stem forms the connection between the brain and the spinal cord. Summary: the neural system coordinates and integrates functions as well as a metabolic and homeostasis activities of all the organs. Neurons, the functional units, neural system are excitable cells due to differential concentration gradient of ions across the membrane. The electrical potential difference across the resting neural membrane is called resting potential. The nerve impulse is conducted along with the axon membrane in the form of a wave of a depolarization and a repolarization. A synapse is formed by a membrane of a presynaptic neuron and a postsynaptic neuron, which may or may not be separated by a gap called synaptic cleft. Chemicals involved in the transmission of impulses at a chemical synapses are called neurotransmitters. Human neural system consists of two parts: central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The brain can be divided into three major parts, that is forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. The forebrain consists of a cerebellum, thalamus, and hypothalamus. The cerebellum is longitudinally divided into two halves that are connected by corpus callosum. A very important part of the forebrain is hypothalamus controls the body temperature, eating, and drinking. Inner part of cerebral hemisphere and group of associated deep structures form a complex structure called a limbic system, which concerned with olfactions, autonomic responses, regulation of sexual behavior, expression of emotions, reactions, and motivation. Midbrain receives and integrate visual, tactile, and auditory inputs. The hindbrain comprises pons, cerebellum, and medulla. The cerebellum integrates information received from the semicircular canals of the ear and auditory system. The medulla contains centers which controls respiration, cardiovascular reflexes, and gastric secretions. Pons consists of a fiber tracts that interconnected different regions of the brain. सो थैंक यू फॉर वॉचिंग दिस वीडियो। हमने टोटली 5 चैप्टर कवर कर लिए हैं ह्यूमन फिजियोलॉजी के, दैट इज़ ब्रीदिंग एंड एक्सचेंज ऑफ गैसेस, body fluids and circulation, excretory products and their elimination, locomotions and movement। और आज अपन ने कवर किया है न्यूरल कंट्रोल एंड कोऑर्डिनेशन। सो कमेंट बॉक्स में बताना वीडियो कैसा लगा, इन वीडियोस की आपको हेल्प हो रही है या नहीं, और मैं खुद में क्या इम्प्रूव कर सकता हूँ। सो थैंक यू फॉर वॉचिंग दिस वीडियो, स्टे ट्यून्ड।